Plymouth Argyle looked on course for comfortable survival last season, didn't they? 16th in December with excellent home form, including trouncings of Norwich City 6-2. That one, the Huddersfield 3-1, the Blackburn Rovers 3-0. Outstanding at home park, even if they're a little bit ropey on the road in the first half of the season. They were ticking off a healthy points tally with a really threatening home goal scoring record. But Steven Schumacher, who had assisted Ryan Lowe to promotion from League Two and in League One, who got them into promotion contention in the third tier as well, before leading them to the League One title in 22-23. He left in December that year for Stoke City, and replacement Ian Foster didn't work out. So Argyle plummeted into relegation danger, and they needed director of football Neil Dewsnip and his assistant Kevin Nancekivell to save the day. Now, Argyle have gone for a risky appointment in Wayne Rooney, which some people have said is PR-led, despite a valid argument from owner Simon Hallett to the contrary. And now it's about whether Plymouth Argyle can build and avoid relegation battle, and whether they can use the Rooney name to attract good players and help them climb the table in the Championship, or whether Rooney's likely to struggle as he did in his last job at Birmingham City. Plenty to discuss then in this Summer Deep Dive. Yes, welcome along to this Summer Deep Dive here on EFL Debate, one of 72 we're doing club by club across the EFL between mid-June and mid-July. The full set already uploaded for League Two, most of League One as well, so and a few for the Championship too. So yeah, get yourself subscribed on YouTube and on Spotify. But for now, I'm delighted to be joined by Joe from Argyle Life and from the Green and White podcast, one of the Green Army as well. Joe, thank you so much for joining me this evening. Really appreciate your time. Can Plymouth Argyle surprise people this season? And is Wayne Rooney going to defy his doubters?
Yeah, start with a nice, easy question, eh, Gab? Can we surprise people? Yeah, look, we surprised people last year, didn't we? We were probably overwhelming favourites to go down. It was no secret that we had the 24th biggest budget in the Championship, and we managed to surprise people by staying up. If truth be told, we probably surprised me a little bit. No matter how positive and green tinted I wanted to be, I think it was always going to be a pretty daunting task last season. But it was just an unbelievable journey. You know, to experience every good roller coaster, Gab, you have ups and downs, don't you? And we had plenty of ups, and then crikey, we didn't have one hell of a down after Christmas. After what was a pretty positive Christmas period as well, which through history, Argo don't tend to fare too well in over Christmas. But we came through that pretty well. Then we obviously lost Shuey to Stoke, and the Ian Foster experiment sort of didn't work out. And you know, the football club, did they wait too long? Did they go too early? Who knows? You know, in the end, hindsight's a wonderful thing, and they probably got it spot on. They gave Nance and Neil just enough time to keep us up, and you know, we had those two unbelievable home results to finish the season with. And the second part of that question, can Wayne Rooney be the man to surprise everyone and take us forward? Depends which sort of way you look at Wayne Rooney's managerial career. If you go purely on results, it's a bit of a dodgy road, isn't it? You know, what is it? Comfortably less than a 1 in 3 win rate at Derby. Minnesota United or DC United, sorry, wasn't a great spell in America. And Birmingham was just a bit of a mess.
Yeah, I mean, I think.
However,
Yeah, go on. So go on.
I was just going to say, however, what you've also got to look at is Wayne Rooney the person and Wayne Rooney the character. You know, the talk out of Derby is how strong his man management was. You know, because he had to galvanise the place, he had to pull people together and get them working for that goal of keeping things going on the pitch, while off the pitch things just spiralled hopelessly out of control. And at Birmingham, it was pretty difficult. He obviously came in to replace a pretty popular character in John Eustace. Nobody really understood what was going on with his departure. And it's very easy to make the case that he didn't have enough time to achieve what he wanted to. He certainly didn't have a transfer window.
No.
So there are several arguments pro and against whether Wayne Rooney is going to work out, but time will tell. And hopefully over the next hour or so, I can try and lend a bit of light as to why it might work out.
You're always lending me lights, Joe. So I in terms of weight, yeah, I do kind of agree to an. I think at Derby, I actually think he did a good job. I know that sounds odd because he was relegated, but those financial issues working under Mel Morris, especially off the backdrop of, so they'd had their big spending period, and then it was like the crisis period. So I don't think you can judge him on results there. And actually, if anything, I think he did a good job developing some young players. There and sort of battling through in difficult circumstances. At Birmingham, yes, I think you can make a case that he didn't have a transfer window to bring in his own players. Would I have liked to have seen him show a little bit more adaptability? Yes, probably would. But I guess I think there's probably a bit of cynicism that follows the appointment, especially off the backdrop of the last permanent appointment that was Ian Foster, Joe, and you're probably looking at more experienced Championship managers like Paul Heckingbottom and Alex Neil, and you may be, is there a case to um, are the key people at Plymouth Argyle who have gained so much credit for the work that they've done, and absolutely 100% rightly so, is some of that trust being eroded a little bit in the eyes of some?
Yeah, I think first of all, just your point on Derby County is absolutely spot on.
Mm,
I actually made the point on our live stream when Rooney was announced that you put a line through Derby, but you also admire what he was able to achieve there. That first season, he
mm,
kept them up, and the second season, if the points deductions had absolutely nothing to do with Wayne Rooney, his style of football, his tactics,
mm,
anything like that. It was, as you say, Mel Morris's mishandling of the football club. And without that points deduction, they were fine that season. They'd have been in a bit of a relegation fight, but I think they'd have been comfortably a couple of points clear of it.
mm,
So you're right there. In terms of the appointment, I think you're spot on. I mean, it's been a summer where we've been linked. It looks like we were going to appoint about 4 different people by the time that Wayne Rooney's name was thrown around. I think Liam Rosenior had been given the job after about 2 minutes of being sacked from Hull, and then it was Paul Heckingbottom, and then Paul Cook's name resurfaced, and Alex Neil's name was being thrown around. There was every man, his cat, and his dog. Seemed like people were linking him to it, and you are right. I think the Ian Foster situation took a lot of people by surprise because, as you say, the decision makers at the football club had built up quite the charge sheet of being spot on with everything that they've managed to do over the course of their tenure at the club. And that was just one that didn't go right. And look, everybody makes mistakes. It's then on the people to hold their hands up and say, look, we got this wrong. We're going to put it right next time. I expected a different type of appointment this time around. I think with the way the Championship and the Football League is going, I sort of expected us to sort of it. There would have been no harm, basically, is what I'm trying to say. There'd have been no harm in just foregoing for 12, 18 months to 2 years, just getting somebody in just to steady the ship a little bit, just sort of
mm,
keep us in a stable position in the league. Simon Hallett's referred to the 5-year plan, and he's often said, to take 2 steps forward, you've got to take 1 step back. Now, I'm not for 1 minute advocating that we go down to League One again, but what I'm saying by that is that you take 1 step back in your search for your future manager by appointing somebody just to come in for 2 years and just steady it, build a strong culture so that then in a couple of years' time, we've got such a foundation that we can really kick on. Because the end goal of this 5-year mission is to be competing for a top 6 place with a view to, trying to get into the Premier League. Now, if you ask me right now, is Wayne Rooney the man that in 3 years' time is going to have us competing in top 6 for a place in the Premier League on everything that he's achieved so far? No. However, if we'd got somebody in for 2 years who could build a foundation, and what I mean by that is we finished 21st last year. So if we finish 18th this season, that's a success. If we finish 15th the season after, that's another success. And then you've got two real strong, solid seasons that a foundation's been built to then breach the top half of the championship. Before you know it, after 3 years, you're a team who's finished 12th in the championship, and there's your springboard towards the top six. Now, look, Simon Hallett and Neil Dewsnip have been quite adamant. They went through a rigorous search process. I'm not sure that the 100 applicants, as it was at Christmas, was quite replicated this time around. Because obviously, at the time of year that we sacked Ian Foster, a lot of people were sitting and waiting to find out what division we were in, quite rightly. But by all accounts, the three people who went for the final interviews had strong credentials, and Wayne Rooney was the man who impressed them. I think I read between the lines on one of the interviews, whether it was something Neil Dewsnip gave or Simon Hallett, that sort of said that it was Wayne Rooney who approached the football club, not Plymouth Argyle approaching Wayne Rooney, which is obviously a good thing. Wayne was obviously sold on the dream, on the vision, and he obviously gave a very good interview on how he sees us moving forward. And so far, off every soundbite we've had from Wayne in interviews and things you pick up on from murmurings within the camp, it's all very positive, and everyone's pulling in the right direction, which at the end of the day wasn't being done between January and April. We were sort of at loggerheads with one another. The ship wasn't sailing forward. And what we found in those last 6 games was that when everyone pulled together and worked as the one Argyle mantra that we always portray, the results were there. We won 3 of that last 6, 3 huge wins that kept us in the division. And we're going to need more of that. And hopefully, as long as Wayne Rooney can buy into that, that's half the job done, I think.
Joe, when I asked the previous question about whether trust had been eroded, I kind of felt, I'll be honest, I kind of winced a little bit in myself, because I feel I've been such a massive admirer of the work that Simon Hallett has done at Plymouth Argyle, and the honesty and the transparency with which he's led the club. And clearly, it's been such a strong day-to-day operation that Andrew Parkinson, Neil Dewsnip and Jimmy Dickinson have all led, along with many other people. So I have sensed a certain amount of uneasiness, maybe, from parts of the fan base. I don't know how big those parts are, and maybe I'm sort of exaggerating how big those parts are, or where the fan base is at. But can you sort of shed a bit of light on that? Not because I haven't necessarily have any questions from a personal point of view over the ownership or the running of the club, because clearly that's been incredibly impressive over the last 5 years, and I have a huge amount of admiration. But I'd just like to understand a little bit more about why maybe one or two that I've come across of maybe asking questions.
Yeah, I think it's right to raise that point, Gab, and I think it's probably more. This isn't me trying to stick the knife in. I think it's probably more the angst is towards Neil Dewsnip than perhaps it is Simon Hallett. A large section of the fan base saw Neil Dewsnip as just appointing one of his mates and Ian Foster. They'd worked together in the England pathway. It was a job for the lads sort of thing, if you get the pun there. And a lot of people put the blame on the Foster debacle solely on Neil Dewsnip, which I personally felt was unfair. I
He
do
had a
feel
great
like there's
coaching
been
reputation, Ian Foster, at the time, Joe.
he
I don't
did.
think you can. I don't think you can be too critical of that.
No.
I think Simon Hallett argued that Ian Foster, the way he presented himself in interviews and the way he actually was after he took the job, were maybe different people,
Yeah,
to
I
quote
think.
his words. So
Yeah, his words basically were the person that we appointed wasn't the person that everyone was seeing. And I think that's spot on. When there was the rumor mill was rife in and around Foster's departure, and look, it's not for us to know what actually went on, and you can't comment on speculation. But going back to it, a lot of the blame was put on Neil Dewsnip for the whole situation, which I think was wrong. I think at that point it was just people were looking for someone to blame. And as you say, Neil Dewsnip's been such a huge part of the football club's success over the last couple of years. Working so closely with Ryan Lowe, that achieved us a promotion. And then, essentially being there for Steven Schumacher at a really tough time when Shu was thrown in the deep end. The gamble that was taken by the football club to give Steven Schumacher the job, and Neil Dewsnip was a real big part in helping Shuey find his feet. And again, played a huge role in that League One title win that none of us will ever forget. It's not just that though. It's not just the work that Neil Dewsnip does with the first team. It's the work that he's put in with the academy. He's taking on being director of football for the women's team now, as they've come under the Argyle umbrella as well. So he's a key part of the football club. And you are right. I think an element of trust has been lost a little bit. That's not a problem. It's certainly not at the point where there's going to be pitchforks and burning
Sure.
effigies
Yeah.
outside home park calling for departures. But I think rightly, when things go as badly as they did with that appointment, there is going to be an element of trust lost. And particularly when the next appointment is Wayne Rooney, who, as you said in your introduction, sort of screams a bit of a PR
Mm.
appointment. Personally, I don't think it is. I think you've probably got to go along the lines of what Simon Hallett's and Neil Dewsnip have said about how he interviewed and things like that. Um, I think rightfully people will be a little bit skeptical, but at the end of the day, they're allowed one bad mistake and they reacted to it pretty
Mm.
quickly in
Yeah.
getting Nancekivell and Dewsnip in charge to keep us up. And now, as I say, without it being a one united football club, we're not going to be able to move forward, and that's all that matters now.
Yeah, sure. I think I always think that when it comes to you've got to give people a bit of leeway. I thought it was an important question mark to bring up because it was on
Hmm.
people's minds. But I also believe that in football, people are imperfect. People can make mistakes sometimes, and I think that those people that we've talked about at Plymouth Argyle have got a hell of a lot more right than they've got wrong. I think
Yeah.
that's fair to say. So I think you've got to give people the benefit of the doubt. At the same time, there is a little bit of pressure on this appointment, and hopefully it goes well. But yeah,
Very, very quickly, Gab.
go
Very
for it.
quickly, you are right in what you're saying there. They have a lot of credit in the bank. However, if this appointment doesn't go right, then more serious questions will be asked of the decision-making process that's gone on at Home Park.
Mm,
Rightly or wrongly, whatever the outside public think, to make one bad appointment, that's fine. But if it goes wrong a second time in quick succession, then
mm,
you are right. Then trust will be eroded a lot more quickly than perhaps it was at the end of last season.
sure. Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. So, in terms of the squad, then Joe,
Hmm.
I wanted to ask you about formation actually because I initially wrote the squad down in a 3-4-2-1 shape with a kind of box midfield, but actually when I look at it, you've brought in Sissoko, who's been described as a left winger. So I'm actually wondering if it's going to be a 4-2-3-1 possibly or a 4-3-3.
It's an interesting one. It's funny. I wrote the squad down myself earlier before we'd signed Ibrahim Sissoko because the last thing I expected today was a signing. I certainly hadn't planned to be talking to you, Gab, after we signed somebody about 4 hours ago. But I've tried to do as much research on Ibrahim Sissoko as I can. But you are right. I think it looks like a four at the back system. I think that's probably where we're going to go. And I think it's clear in our transfer policy so far that it's about getting as many quick, agile, technical players in forward positions as we can. I think, I advocated even at the back end of last season that I thought 4-2-3-1 suited our squad much better than the system perhaps we were playing. I do think, however, with the addition of Sissoko on the left, Whittaker on the right, I do think it probably lends itself more to a 4-3-3
Mm-hmm.
now,
Yeah.
because you've got any three then of Randall, Houghton, Forshaw, and Darko JB to play those three roles in midfield,
Mm.
and then you've got any three then of Morgan Whittaker, Ibrahim Sissoko, Mustafa Bundu, Mohamed Tijani, Ryan Hardy, Callum Wright, Ben Wayne, Freddie Asaka to play any of those three roles up front.
Sorry,
So I think
Isaka you would consider part of the first team consideration then, Joe, this season?
I do. I don't. I sort of half thought last season that perhaps this year he would be that one who would go out on loan.
Mm.
But I just think that he's rated so highly at home park, and particularly with having somebody like Wayne Rooney in the building, I think they're going to try and keep him in and around the group. Now, I'm not going to sit here and say he's going to get a huge amount of game time because I think that's going to be very difficult. Certainly with the quality we've added in recent days to that front line. But I think it would be better for his development at the moment to stay within the building. Look, things might change in January, and perhaps there may be an opportunity to get him game time. But I just don't think at this point it would be beneficial to get him out on loan, particularly as realistically, what sort of level are we looking to get him out at? I think if we are going to get him out on loan, we need to be getting him out to a football league club.
Yeah.
And to do that, I think he needs a couple of minutes off the bench in the championship just to show football league scouts that he's capable. And then, as I say, maybe in January we can look to get him a loan spell in one of the lower leagues, a League One, League Two, second half of the season. But I really rate Osaka, and I think in and amongst that group, he adds a different quality, if you like, to what we've already got. But it's
Could he
exciting.
play?
We have
Could he,
options. We have options in a forward position, Gab. We haven't had that for a while.
could he play wide in a front three?
Yeah, I think so.
I thought so.
I think particularly, I think it might have even been the Birmingham game last year. That crazy 3-3 sort of cut in from that left hand side and had a shot go wide, right at the death at the end of that crazy game. So, I think that's his bag of tricks is probably on the left hand side cutting in, sort of a little bit similar to Mustafa Bundu, if you like, because that's where we saw Mustafa Bundu at his best last season. So. No, it's a big pre-season for Freddie, and hopefully he can get plenty of minutes under his belt and try and impress Rooney.
Goalkeepers then, Joe. Michael Cooper. Is he going to be one of the best goalkeepers in the championship this season if you keep hold of him?
He might be, but he might not be our goalkeeper, Gab. Chris Arrington, the local journalist for Plymouth Live, ran a story about 10 days, 2 weeks ago, that's reporting that he understood and Plymouth Live understood that Cooper had actually turned down a new contract offer from the football club, that would have made him the highest paid player in the club's history, and that the football club were now willing to listen to offers. And if there is a modicum of truth to that, then with Michael Cooper out of contract in 12 months' time, there's only
You've
one
got to
thing that the
cash in.
football
You
club need
can't
to
leave
do.
a player of his ability for free, can
No.
you?
Now look, there's a lot of time to go between now and the end of the transfer window. There may be a change of plans on either side, and maybe Coops will sign a contract. I would absolutely love him to, because I think you've hit the nail on the head that in a competitive group of goalkeepers in the championship, Michael Cooper has to be in the discussion to be up there with one of the very best. He is absolutely superb. Yes, he's a little bit there's a little bit of a question mark hanging over him now, having had 2 knee injuries in the last 2 seasons. But we saw towards the back end of last season that he looked strong. He certainly hadn't lost any of his physicality or his movement, and it's a reassurance to the fan base to have Cooper in goal. If it is to be Connor Hazard, if Michael Cooper is to be sold, and Connor Hazard is to take over, I personally wouldn't have a problem with that. I think the problem Connor Hazard had at the start of last season was that everybody was immediately comparing his style of goalkeeping to Michael Cooper's, and they're chalk and cheese. Connor Hazard's a big, imposing figure of a keeper, whereas Michael Cooper's obviously a little bit smaller. And I do think they're a little bit different. And Connor Hazard did put in some very important performances for us last season, and is capable of pulling off some very good saves. So
As
there
a
will
shot
need to
stopper,
be.
he's good enough, I think, Joe.
Yeah,
But
he is. His
I think
distribution, his distribution is totally different to Michael Cooper's. That's the problem. And with the system we were trying to play with Steven Schumacher last year, and the system that's been so successful to the football club where we play out from the back, Michael Cooper is 10 times the player in that situation than Connor Hazard is. Now, how Wayne Rooney is going to set us up distribution wise may suit Hazard a little bit more. We don't know because we haven't seen a Wayne Rooney Argyle team play. But certainly, if Cooper is going to go, then we will we will certainly need another body in there.
Well, what I would say, Joe, is that Rooney is quite uncompromising as a manager, because I think he's going to approach his managerial career as a little bit like Wayne Rooney, the brand, if you like, where he's going to want to have his teams playing a certain style of football so that he can market himself for bigger opportunities. That's what he did at Derby, actually, because as much as I credit what he did at Derby, he did try and get Curtis Davies and Phil Jagielka playing a high line, playing out from the back at 36 and 40 or whatever their ages were. And then at Birmingham, there wasn't a huge amount of comfort playing out from the back, and he still went away from what was working under John Eustace. So I personally don't see Wayne Rooney changing or compromising on his approach. So for me, I think it's imperative that if Michael Cooper goes, Plymouth Argyle sign a goalkeeper that's really good at distribution, because that's how it's got to. That's how you can implement the style successfully.
Yeah, and I would agree with that. And as I say, one of Coops' strong points in the last few seasons is just how well we've been able to integrate his distribution into our attacks going forward. There have been several times where he's actually been a key part of the team getting up the field quickly to then get the ball to a Morgan Whittaker, a Ryan Hardy, players like that has lent us to be so successful in recent seasons. So Connor Hazard's had a season in the building now. Perhaps he's managed to change, he's managed to adapt to that. As a shot stopper, as you say, he's second to none. He's a very good goalkeeper. But that's probably the one question mark at the moment, is what is Coops' position with 12 months to go? Because as you say, we cannot sit on it and wait for this window to pass if Coops is going to be sat there mulling over his options. If there's not going to be any committal there to the future, then unfortunately, Coops' sale was always part of the financial plan moving forward, as with other players in the squad. So, there will come a tough decision, but a business decision that the football club will need to make.
Certainly. Joe, for Plymouth Argyle to try and make progress from last season's relegation battle, you've got to look at areas where you can really grow, you can really maximise. And the big one for me, looking at this squad, is Ballymumba, because he was outstanding in League One. I'm very confident that he's good enough for Championship level in whatever position, whether that's wing back, whether that's wide forward, whether that's central midfield. I think he's good enough, but my question to you would be, how do you get the best out of Ballymumba?
Play him in the position he's most comfortable in it's a simple answer, and that's the way that we do it. The problem with that is I think he's more comfortable as a wing back, playing at left wing back, and I'm not too sure we're going to be playing a system that's going to involve wing backs.
Right.
So as you say, how many teams play a 4 at the back system, but the 2 fullbacks actually play as wing backs? Not very many. So we're going to have
Unless,
to look at that.
Joe, unless you could operate with the 4-3-3, where the right backs are given lots of creative freedom
Yeah.
and your pivot drops into a back three in possession.
Yeah, possibly. And that would probably then lend to where a Houghton or even a Randall to some extent would come into it. I'd certainly look at those two to play that role more than I would a JB or a Forshaw.
Yeah.
I think those two would probably be the two that will get forward most out of those 4. But you are right, and Mumba and Edwards really are 2 players who just excel in a fullback system. We saw that at the back end of last season when the 2 guys, Nancekivell and Dewsnip, went back to the old system, if you like. how comfortable we looked in those games. Even the games we got beaten towards the end there. Other than really the Stoke game, I would say that was probably a little bit too emotional. There was too much on it, obviously off the pitch with who we were going up against. I think that was probably the only game we didn't really compete in that mini league, if you like, at the end. So um, you think back to the Rotherham game, even that first game in charge that the two guys had. Mumba was back in that comfortable position on that left side, and he popped up with a goal there that was so crucial in the end. And you are right. I think he is capable of playing in the Championship, and there is a very, very good player there. It's just that he was asked to play a lot further forward last season, and at the start of the season, I think it worked because teams didn't quite know how to cope with him in that role when he was playing up front with Whittaker and Hardy. When we came up against the more smarter teams, if you like, or those teams with just better quality at the back, Mumba was very easily marked out of the game. And he was very quickly shut down. He wasn't able to get a lot of joy. And then really he sort of drifts through games, and we sort of carry him as a bit of a passenger.
Yeah.
And same as last season, it's going to be very much the case this season that we can't have passengers. We're going to need everyone to give it everything they've got. They're going to have to influence the game as much as they can, and we're certainly not going to be able to allow players to drift through it. So it's also the debate also still rages whether or not the left or the right is his best side as well. I think it's more the left than the right.
Oh,
I think he's better on that left-hand side personally,
interesting.
than he is the right. But that's purely because he was mostly playing on the left in that League One promotion season.
Right.
Because obviously we had Joe Edwards on the right. So
Mm.
it'll be an interesting case. But at the moment, we're probably still short of somebody on that right side of defence. So maybe with Nathaniel Ogbetter coming in and Saxon early, who
Mm.
the poor kid, I just hope and pray he manages to get through a pre-season in the first couple of weeks of the season without getting injured. That he
Yeah.
deserves a change of luck. And we've seen enough of Saxon, particularly in the game at Watford last season where he was man of the match, that there is a player capable of playing in the Championship on that left side. So that may allow Mumba to drift back to the right, which is where Norwich originally thought he was best. But yeah, I mean,
Well,
we
Joe,
paid him.
sorry to just jump in there.
That's all right.
The other thing that's occurred to me is, could you invert Ballymumba from right back and then play Brendan Galloway tucking into a back three? So you then got in possession Pellegrizalo, Gibson, and Galloway as a kind of in possession back three, and then Mumba comes into midfield alongside someone like Houghton or Randall.
Yep, I can see it, Gab. I can totally see that. Because of course you got to remember we can play a back four and have Galloway at left back. Because he's more than comfortable in that position. He played it
Yeah.
one game in particular last season where I thought he was superb playing there. So and not only that, he's an aerial threat in defending and attacking as well. So
So
you are
actually,
right.
that could work quite nicely as a
Yeah,
sort of left centre back in possession type thing.
Yeah, and particularly then, if you're able to rely on somebody, if Randall perhaps is also very good at getting forward, but also getting back just as quickly,
Mm,
and has some defensive qualities, and if you've got somebody like a Mustafa Bundu on that left hand side of attack,
mm,
if you can bank on him coming back to just support them if we slot into a three at the back in that side, inverting Bali Mumba, then yeah, I can definitely see how that would work.
yeah,
And look, you try and find me an Argyle fan that wouldn't get excited about Barley Mumba linking up from defence with Morgan Whittaker in attack. So,
absolutely.
um, it's definitely a system that can work. And maybe at the end of this, Gab, I'll try and get hold of Wayne Rooney's phone number and just fire it over to him.
Absolutely. So that's sort of pivot midfield, if you like. I'm thinking instinctively, Joe. I don't know what you think. I'm thinking Randall might get the nod over Jordan Houghton because I think if you want to play possession-based football, I think Houghton is steady enough on the ball for League One level, and I think he looks after it. But I think at Championship level, with the tempo, with the intensity of the press, I'm not sure he's quite going to cut it if you want to play that style. So I'm thinking I might be a bit more comfortable with someone like Randall there.
Yeah, I probably agree with you. I like Jordan Houghton. I think, he's one of those players that actually a lot of the fan base will probably only really look back and appreciate as much as he deserves once
Mm.
his Argyle career is over.
Mhm.
He's got a lot of admirers in the fan base, but equally there's a lot of people who would much rather see other midfielders start ahead of him. And you are right. I think Randall probably does look after the ball better, and he is one who can link the play from the back to the front if we are going to keep the ball on the ground and play with our feet. And the obviously you've got Darko JB coming back in, and he's going to be hopefully utilised in a more forward role in midfield as well. I'd be amazed if we ever see him in that pivot position. I do think that was probably one
Mm.
of Ian Foster's biggest mistakes last year was not utilising JB going forward. Because towards the end of his loan spell, before he got that injury, that was where we were seeing him at his very best. And that
Mm.
little midfield four, without adding in somebody like a Will Jenkins-Davis, who's obviously coming back into the fold this season as well.
Mm.
That midfield four is going to be a really interesting fight just to see who's going to start in there. I would imagine if we're playing the 4-2-3-1, I would imagine you would probably look at certainly Randall being one of them, and then you probably could get a Houghton in there. Um, it would all just depend on how forward thinking Wayne Rooney wants to be and getting
Yeah,
those
I'm not.
three then in
I'm
front.
thinking. Yeah, I'm thinking Randall, GAB, and Callum Wright possibly.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Possibly. I mean, it's another season where Callum Wright sort of has to start again as well. He's sort of League One season, he was obviously instrumental at the back end of that, and then things just didn't quite go right at the start of last season.
Mm.
And then obviously there was the situations where he just wasn't in the squad under Ian Foster despite being fit, and he came back in towards the end and actually showed us the Callum Wright that we'd seen of old.
Mm.
So you'd like to think that he can use that momentum into this season and perhaps maybe coming back a little bit deeper in the midfield rather than being up alongside a Whittaker or a Hardy might suit him a bit more because then he'll be on the ball a lot more and he'll be
Interesting.
able to seam things together a little bit.
Well, the other thing is, Darko JB's a real athlete as well, isn't he? So I'm
Mm.
thinking JB could play a bit of a box to box role. And I do like the idea of him creating space. And then what I've always liked about Callum Wright is I think he can kind of spin away from opponents and create something. He's got a kind of balletic quality about him. Not that I've seen it yet in the Championship, but I'm hoping that in the right sort of system he could come to the fore.
Yeah, I agree. And, again, Callum's a player that you're willing him to do well because he's one of
Mm.
these players that we've sort of hung our hat on with our transfer policy. A lot of it is low risk, high reward with the transfer policy. And Callum Wright is a player who, if you get a good season out of him, I don't know. I'm not privy to however much it was we paid for him or if we paid a fee at all when he first came to the football club. But he's certainly somebody that in the future, if he was to get a good season under his belt, we could utilize his sale towards the plan. And at the end of the day, people scoff at it. But football is a business, and this is clearly our transfer plan: is to get these young players in, is to develop them into, what the club see themselves as stepping stones for players' careers. And that's fine as long as we get a good 18 months, 2 years out of players. It's when you bring somebody in the summer and then sell them in January for big
Mm.
money. I think that's when people get frustrated. But I just hope that the I don't want to use the word negativity, but sort of the rough few months that Callum Wright's had leading in towards the back end of that season, that's gone now. And we see the Callum Wright that we first signed at the back end of the League One season.
Mm. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Will Jenkins Davis excited me when you mentioned him because I've always felt like he's a bit of a prospect. I guess I've felt like it's been difficult for him with Argyle either being a very successful team in League One or playing in the Championship, which is such a demanding level that maybe it's been hard for him to get opportunities, especially in terms of starts. But do you expect him to come into the first team squad consideration this season, a bit like Freddie Isaka?
It's an interesting one because he's followed the Randall route, if you like, the tried and tested of give him a little bit of exposure. Right, you
Mm-hmm.
go into Torquay for a season. He's done very well at Torquay. There were a lot of good reviews from there. He was popping up with goals as
I'm not
well.
surprised, really, to be honest, because wasn't it National League South level? I mean, it's like
It
Jesus.
it
He's
was
way above
it
that.
was It was, and you'd like to think he'd be able to perform well at that level.
Yeah.
But equally, you can only do what's put in front of you. And by all accounts, he was very impressive. It will be really interesting. I sort of hope that he doesn't go out on loan again. I would like that we certainly for the first half of the season that we keep him in the building. Um, because when you have senior professionals in that position like Jordan Houghton and Adam Forshaw, who've a lot of experience under their belts. I mean, even Adam Randall now. I think we can sort of drop the young man tag. He's played a lot of football at various
It's a bit
levels.
like a parent saying to their kids, they're thinking their
It
kid's still
is, yeah.
young.
He's I think we've got to talk about Adam Randall now being as an experienced midfielder, if not in age.
Yeah, you're a big boy
So
now, Adam.
indeed. So Jenkins Davis got a lot of good people to learn from. I would imagine that perhaps Caleb Roberts will probably be the next one on the conveyor belt, if you like, to go out and get that loan experience. And, perhaps then maybe again, similar to Asaka, keep him in the building for the first half of the season. Then maybe in January, if there is an opportunity to get him some minutes elsewhere.
Mm.
If as long as it's not all hands to the pump and we don't have a mass injury crisis, I certainly think that might be the way to go. But it,
I'm backing Jenkins Davis to make a difference in League Two. If it came to
yeah,
that, I know he's in National League South last season, but I think he's good enough for League Two right now,
yeah,
definitely.
I would agree with you, and particularly with a club like Cheltenham who aren't too far up the road, who we could maybe send him out on loan to something like that. It's a real shame that
Or
um,
Newport possibly, Joe.
yeah, it's a shame. I was sort of looking at Newport and pigeonholing them as a potential feeder club for a few of the youngsters before Graham Coughlin left the club, obviously with the Argyle link there. Hopefully that wouldn't put pay to that. That was sort of the club I would be looking at. But
Well, actually, if
um,
anything, I can see why you'd look at it from that angle, Jay. But from another angle, it might mean that Newport, because they've got Hugh Jenkins as owner now, so it might who's associated with Swansea. So it might be that Newport are actually going to play a bit more football next season. So they might actually be a better place for someone like Jenkins Davis to go to. So
yeah,
that's an option as
possibly.
well.
And as I say, I think that would probably be the. I know it's easy to look at it when you've got a blank piece of paper in front of you before the start of the season, before any of the usual football roller coaster. To keep using the word roller coaster, but before the football roller coaster kicks in, of good form, bad form, injury crisis, and stuff like that. Certainly, keeping those two in particular in the building until at least January, and then maybe look at game time
Hmm.
would certainly be how I would look at playing it anyway.
So last season, Joe, Argyle were very reliant on Ryan Hardy and Morgan Whittaker and didn't give either of them a lot of service. So they did very well to score 19 and 12 goals, respectively. Um, Obviously, you've got to improve the service to either of them if they're both present at the club this season. But I guess that is the question, isn't it? Do you think you'll keep hold of Morgan Whittaker and Ryan Hardy, or get the at least get the right fee for either or both of them?
Um, yeah, I hope we're not trying to put them in the shop window here, Gab. I would like them both to remain Plymouth Argyle players for as long, for quite a while yet. I'd say there's probably more of a question mark over Morgan Whittaker for obvious reasons. He was so instrumental to everything that was good last season. And let's be brutally honest about it, without his form carrying over through Christmas and that early part of the Ian Foster reign, it would have been very difficult for us to make a case of staying in the Championship. At times he was single-handedly carrying the team, it seemed, with goals and certainly assists. It's a big point to make. Ryan Hardy's a bit of an interesting one because, as you know from my many appearances on the show, Gab, I often have a tin hat on when I'm defending Ryan Hardy. And he's never quite, again, similar to Jordan Houghton, it's probably only in about 10 years' time that people will look back and think, bloody hell, what a striker Ryan Hardy was. When actually we should be appreciating him right now for just how good a servant he's been in 3 leagues. Remember, 3 leagues. He's done it in all 3 leagues for us. And the interesting thing about Hardy is it seems certainly in recent seasons that his form tends to drop away the last couple of months of the season. And then perhaps around the September, October, November time is really when he hits his straps and gets scoring. And then after Christmas, it just tends to drop away, whether or not that's fatigue or injury levels or just the fact, like last year, that they weren't getting the service and that we weren't playing a style of play that suits. As for Morgan, look, I think Wayne Rooney said it himself in the press conference. He expects interest. Why wouldn't there be interest? When you see the money that's thrown around for players these days, it's very easy to see why the Green Army get overexcited about potential transfer fees. And
You certainly would be in the green if you sold Morgan Whittaker, wouldn't you?
so, yeah, I don't think we'd have to worry about funding any of the infrastructure projects that are going on around the football club.
You could certainly pay for a bus for the reserve team, wouldn't you, with that sort of money?
Yeah, I'd like to think we'd be able to service the minibus that takes the kit man away to games or something like that. But you are right, and as I go back to what I said about Barley Mumba and Michael Cooper and players like that, you know, these are players that futures that are big parts of the football club security moving forward. In the respect that there's no secret that we are going to be, I don't want to coin the phrase a selling club, but we're going to be more of a development club for players' careers. That we are going to sign these young players, we're going to bring them through for a couple of years, and then hopefully, as long as all goes well, we'll sell them on for a rich profit for ourselves that will then fund the signings of future players. I would like to hope that Morgan's got certainly one more season left in him. I don't imagine I'd be a little bit surprised if he left this window. I'll be
Oh,
honest.
really?
Yeah, I think I would. Um, I think he's, I said it a number of times, and I just want to reiterate the fact that for Morgan Whittaker, a lot of it is about happiness and his confidence and his peace of mind. And I think in Plymouth, he's got a home. Look, I shouldn't be naive and blinkered to think that loyalty is too ingrained in football these days, because I think we all know that it isn't. But we've shown an immense amount of respect to Morgan and an immense amount of loyalty in recent years in giving him the opportunity to get out of Swansea and find a new home that both he and his partner are very happy in. So, I'm sure when the time comes, Morgan will repay that loyalty to us, whether or not that is, moving on for a big fee or whether it's staying another 12 months. However, that loyalty is repaid. But you look at in particular, the signings of Mohamed Tijani and Ibrahim Sissoko, you'd like to think that the service is going to improve to both Hardy and Whittaker. It's maybe not all the pressure is going to be on them.
Yeah, they
I
might not
do,
have.
I do wonder.
Yeah, sorry, they
I
might
do
not have
wonder
a
if.
burnout.
Yeah, go on. Yeah, exactly, and I do wonder if towards that back third of the season last year, whether it was a case that, if Hardy or Whittaker didn't score or didn't have 8 out of 10 games, then a lot of people were looking at it thinking, well, that's Plymouth stopped.
Mm.
If we stop Whittaker and Hardy, we stop Plymouth,
Mm.
basically. And hopefully now the signings of Tijani, Sissoko, and people like that, Bundu coming up to full fitness and having a full season under his belt, hopefully that will just take a lot of the burden and pressure off them, and then they can be freer and more expressive, which really, in that League One season, when it was everybody chipping in, was when we saw the best of Whittaker and Ryan Hardy.
Yeah, Sissoko is a signing that I'm particularly excited about because I've seen a few clips of him now. You can't judge
Yeah.
everything on the clips. You've got to be careful with that. But he
What do you mean? I've watched an 8-minute YouTube video, Gab, and I already want him to win the Ballon d'Or. What are you talking
he's
about?
world class. No, but I think he looks like a real box of tricks, doesn't he? And
Hmm.
I mean, I think Rooney might have mentioned the pace or athleticism that he has, but for me, it's his what stood out in those clips was the quality of deliveries and also his sort of just skillfulness, that bit of flair that he has. So again, I think that's a really exciting thing from the point of view of service and ammunition. Yeah, so I'm really excited about that addition. Um, Centre backs then, Joe. Talk to me about Lewis Gibson because his form in the first half of last season under Steven Schumacher was outstanding, wasn't it?
It certainly was, and I still have it hanging over me, the statement I made after game 3 last year that Lewis Gibson's the best centre back I've ever seen play for Plymouth Argyle. So I'd like, I made that statement on a podcast of ours, so I've got to stick to it. I think Gibson's outstanding. I think his all round play is superb. I think, when he is in that back line, I think we are a much better team. Fortunately, we didn't have too many occasions last year where he wasn't in that back line. And there's real quality, obviously, with Galloway there as well. Um, and if you look at it, if you were to have, going back to your point earlier about inverting Mumba and having Galloway on that left side, if you have Galloway and Gibson on that left side of a back
Mm.
four, you'd like to think that there aren't going to be many people who'd be able to breach that as a pair. Um, it's the right side where perhaps there's a little bit of a question mark, because Pleguezuelo came in and there was a lot of excitement about Pleggy signing, and there were some good performances in there, but equally there were some moments where perhaps he was found out a little bit, again by some of those better teams. And let's not get away from it. We're going to be coming up against a lot of better teams than us across the course of the season. It's just how we cope with that. And with Dan Scar, again, there's always a rumor flying around that Scar might leave the football club. We're certainly not in a position at the moment to get rid of a centre back. I think if we were to sign a centre back, then perhaps that would lend to a bit more of a rumour mill of one leaving. But there's always going to be a little bit of a question mark as to whether Dan Scar can step up to the Championship, and probably more importantly, with the way that Wayne Rooney plays, is Dan Scar going to be suitable in a back four? Um, there's often this school of
Yeah,
thought
I
that
think
perhaps Dan Scar is
Plagazelo
going to be better
actually
in a three.
suits. Mm. No, I think that makes an awful lot of sense. I do think that Pleguezuelo has that assurance under pressure that I think Wayne Rooney is going to like with the way that he builds up play from the back. So for me, if you play a back four, I think it's going to be Pleguezuelo and Gibson.
Yeah, I would agree with that. At this moment in time, I would probably agree. If you're going with that back four system, you're probably going to go with Galloway at left on the left side if it's not going to be Mumba,
Mm.
and then Gibson, Pleguezuelo, and Mumba on that right.
Mm.
Obviously, because we don't know yet about we haven't seen as a fan base Nathaniel Og better. We don't quite know what his strengths and weaknesses are.
Well, Joe,
Um,
I think what's interesting because we've said that the squad, you've said it might be unlikely that you play with wing backs, but I guess the argument for it would be that you've got Ogbeta and Sorinola. I think have done their best work in their careers so far as wing backs rather than full backs, and probably the same for Ballymumba as well. And you
hmm,
could even say Joe Edwards too. So I actually think in terms of fullbacks slash wing backs, you've got players who play better as wing backs. However,
yeah.
it's you've got lots of midfield options, and then you've got sort of wide forward options as well, which kind of lends itself to a 4-3-3. So you've got some dilemmas there, but hopefully that can give you some flexibility as well.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And actually, looking at the five fullback options that we've got, I would probably bar. I don't want to say that Saxon Early can't play in a wing back system because we've seen very little of him in an Argyle wing-back system. But certainly with the other four, Mumba, Ogbeta, Sorinola and Edwards, I would be much happier and much more comfortable if we were playing a wing-back system. Because as you say, with everything that Ogbeta's done, he's been more effective as a wing-back. And we know for a fact with the other three that when they're in a wing-back system, that we've seen it with our own eyes, we know they're comfortable. So that's you raise a good point, and it is a good in a way it's a good headache for Rooney to have. I'd much rather us have depth, because that was probably one of the criticisms of the squad last year, was that we were reactive rather than proactive in trying to get depth into the squad in January. Whereas this summer it looks like we're being very proactive with our transfer system. So I would like to see wing backs, but as you say, with Rooney's history of how he sets the team up, it's just, and with those midfield and attacking options, it's just how he gets a system there where we can play a more wing back like style of play, if you like.
Any of the youngsters that we've not mentioned yet? We've spoken about Freddie Asaka, Will Jenkins-Davis, Caleb Roberts, who's only 18. Anyone else who could come into the equation, do you think?
I'm not sure whether or not I can class him as a youngster. Actually, I'll give you two very quickly. Going back to the goalkeeping situation, I know that the football club rates Zach Baker very highly. Now, I'm not going to sit here and say that if Michael Cooper was to leave, that it would just be Connor Hazard and Zach Baker as the two keepers. I think that would be a very, very risky way to go about it. But I know that they like Zach Baker. I know that they've been very keen to sort of use him alongside, it was often Cooper, Hazard, Burton and Baker was always the discussion. Zach Baker was always being mentioned when the goalkeeping situation came up. So I just thought I'd give him a little mention. The other one, again, I'm not sure whether I can class him as a youngster, but Ben Wayne is one that everybody always wants to talk about, Wayne. And I sort of feel for Ben Wayne, and I don't mean this in a negative about him per se, but I think the best thing for Ben Wayne at the moment is that we go out and get another centre forward striker in the building, and then Ben Wayne can go out on loan. Because I think there is a player in there for Ben Wayne. He's just finished top goal scorer for New Zealand in a Oceanica. Oceania was a nightclub. Oceanica like Cup of Nations style tournament. He's just finished joint top goal scorer in that. And I think there is a player there. I think we see glimpses of there being a real good player. The only thing is he's very rough around the edges for me. And I don't think he's quite streetwise enough.
I think his link-up play is good, Joe.
Yeah.
I think physicality would be a question. I can't see you bringing another striker personally. I think with Hardy there, you've got Bundu, you've got Isaka, and you've got Tijani. I think I've got that. Have I got that pronunciation?
Yeah, but that's what I'm going with, Tijani, anyway. So
Tijani, thank you. So you've got four players who can play down the middle. I'm not sure you'll go for another striker necessarily. So we'll see. But yeah, I can see how a loan might help Ben Wayne.
I just think it's a case of it's about making him a little bit more streetwise, if you like. And I go back to using the whole short-term loan facility. A short loan until Christmas even might be a short solution if there's a clause in there that we could recall him at any moment if we need to. And you would be looking at clubs, again in the vicinity of us, somebody like a Bristol Rovers perhaps. Get him up there for a few months until Christmas. Or one of those clubs in League One. I'd ideally like him to be in and around a team that's going to be in the top half of League One. I wouldn't want him mixing it with a team that's going to be down there struggling. So I'm not sure that's really going to be where we'll see the best of him. But that's because I really want the Wayne transfer to work. And it goes on to the broader point of our transfer policy that we're having to fish in different ponds to other clubs. We know our place in the food chain, and we have to be smarter than other clubs, if you like, with how we recruit, because we never will have the money to compete with the top clubs in this division. If truth be told, we don't have the money to compete with a Preston or a Millwall or a club like that in this league. So we have to be smarter in how we recruit. And that's where signings like Ben Waine from the A-League, Mohamed Tijani on loan from Slavia Prague, Ibrahim Sissoko from Toulouse, players like this really, Mustafa Bundu from Anderlecht. These are the sorts of signings that are going to be crucial to us going forward. And I go back to the saying, it's they're low risk, high reward. I just hope that at the end of it, at the end of Ben Wayne's time at Argyle, we can look back on it and say, well, that was one that got away. I want it to be a success, because then, going back to the question about trust earlier on, you retain that trust in the recruitment team. And that's a big thing moving forward for the football club.
Certainly is. Moving forward for the football club, expectations, Joe. What's the expectation for Plymouth Argyle this season?
Another roller coaster is the expectation. I just hope that the lows aren't as low as it was last year. I was just having a look before coming on, Gab, actually, that last season, if you go by the FOTMob stats, we were in the last quarter of the league for things like goals conceded per match, average possession, accurate passes per match, accurate crosses per match. We were 18th for touches in the opposition box. We're going to have to be better. We're going to have to show our quality more in games. We're not going to be able to just sit back and say, oh, you're Burnley, you're better than us. There's the ball. We'll try and nick one on the break. We're going to have to try and compete more in big games. And importantly, home form. You mentioned it yourself that the home form really did get us over the line. We're going to need to keep that strong this year. I think the Championship is a harder league this year. Not trying to rub it into the noses of Huddersfield and Rotherham fans too much, but almost certainly Portsmouth and Derby will improve the Championship, I think. I think they're going to be better. They're going to be harder propositions than Huddersfield and Rotherham were last season. I know that we've lost Leicester, Southampton, and Ipswich, who are three excellent sides, but Burnley, Sheffield United, those two in particular have very strong records in the Championship. They'll have to recruit well, I think, to sort of change the rot that they were in last year. Luton are a bit of a funny fish, I think. I think Luton will probably either excel or find themselves languishing in no man's land a little bit, but it is going to be harder. The expectation again, Gab, is just 21st place. I know it's boring. I know it's negative. I know it's not very inspiring to people, but equally, there's a reason we're second favourites to be relegated. And we can be as optimistic and hopeful as much as we like, but the facts are there that we are going to be one of the favourites to go down, and we are going to be fighting against it. We're already fighting against the narrative that Wayne Rooney is not the man to take us forward. So we're going to constantly have to overachieve, but it's something that the last 4 years I think we've done pretty well. So why can't we do it for a fifth year?
Well, that kind of answers my next question, which is what's the biggest reason to believe that Argyle can meet their ambitions this season? And I suppose you've met your ambitions consistently for the last 5 years.
Basically, we've hit every target. We've achieved everything we've wanted to do over the last 5 years. We got out of League Two. We steadied ourselves in League One. We almost got into the playoffs in League One the season after. We then won League One. We stayed up in the Championship. If we carry on that trend, let's steady ourselves in the Championship this year. And next year, I can come here in the summer, Gab, and talk about a playoff push. But that's the basics.
You'll have had a bit of cider by that point, Joe, would you?
I don't know about that, but it's just the fact of it is that we have to remember where we are in the food chain. We've got to keep ourselves grounded and level-headed. There are going to be some tough times this season. There are going to be some hard passages of play with real tough runs of fixtures. But equally, like last season, there are going to be some unbelievable highs. And you've got to hang your hope on that there's going to be more highs than lows. And actually, I'm pretty confident that I think we will be okay this season. Albeit I haven't seen a Wayne Rooney Argyle team set up. I just think there's enough factors there to suggest that this is an appointment that could work, and I'm relatively positive, particularly with the transfer business that we're doing.
Biggest reason for doubt?
Yeah. Do I only get one, or can I have my? The biggest reason for doubt is Wayne Rooney's track record to date, isn't it? And if it goes as it did at Birmingham, which I really, really hope it doesn't, because it goes back to the element of trust in the decision makers. And, we don't want to see ourselves as a sacking club. We've built a strong reputation of moving forward every time. So we don't want that to fall over us. Because then if you do have to replace the manager so soon, it brings turmoil, and we don't want that to drag on too long. So I suppose the biggest doubt it could work is whether or not Rooney's up to the job. I'd like to think he is, because I back the decision makers. And if they've seen something in him against the other candidates, then he must be all right.
Give me a number then, Joe, between 1 and 10 to denote your level of optimism for the season ahead.
I thought you were going to say, give me a number 1 to 10 as the finishing position. And look,
that would be a number, 20 to 24.
Yeah, and it would be 21 probably. No, I'd say at least a 6.5. Because as I say, I think this job is totally different to the last 3 that Wayne Rooney's had. I think it's a different setup at Plymouth Argyle to the 3 clubs that he's had, and there is momentum off that buzz of the end of last season. Season ticket sales were extraordinary. I'm already seeing people going around with the new kit on. Everybody is excited again, and we're stepping into the unknown again with another managerial appointment. But as long as everybody pulls together and we stay moving forward as one, then I think there is enough cause for positivity there, and that we can outdo everybody's expectations once again. Because I'm sure when the predictions come out from everybody, we'll be in a familiar red zone, but hopefully those will get pinned up on the changing room wall and we can prove them all wrong.
Absolutely, that's what it's all about. Joe, thanks so much for your insight this evening. Really appreciate your time. I encourage everyone to go follow Argyle Life. You can also subscribe to your Substack as well. There's several packages as well for excellent weekly Plymouth Argyle content. Can you talk a little bit about your plans for that for next season, Joe?
Yeah, well, we've got a couple of lads who are committed to the Substack, which is great, because that means my writing and insightful analysis isn't needed on that. I can just waffle away on the podcast. But no, we've got some very exciting plans. We've got a few more of our really exciting My Argyle Lives planned across the next few months, and then we'll be back with, I think, Aaron's. I don't know what Aaron's planning at the moment, because he's actually going out to Marbella tomorrow to the pre-season tour. So
Right.
him and Sam are off for a few days in the sun, and they're going to report live from pre-season, which is very exciting. And I recommend everybody catches that over the weekend. And then I think we're moving to 3 podcasts a week next season. So
commitment.
Yeah, we're going to be very busy. We've forgone all aspects of a personal and private life for the club. So let's just hope it's all positive and worth it.
Absolutely. Well, that's surely worth a follow for the Green and White podcast as well. As you can see on the handle, it's at Argyle Life 1886 for those listening to this on Spotify. And if you are listening to this on Spotify and you've enjoyed the episode, give us a review, because that would help us out a lot. Ideally a positive one. Get yourself subscribed to Spotify and YouTube, and we'll see you again here on AFL Debate for another summer deep dive very soon.